What's up, everybody? Caleb from On the Wrong Lead here. Today we have our second video from our StableDuel 101 series, Stable Building Factors. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the high-level considerations and factors that I think about when putting together a stable in StableDuel. If you're new to StableDuel or you don't know much about it, check out our first StableDuel 101 video, Getting Started with StableDuel. That's where I'll go through all of the rules and the scoring and the very basics of how the app works. Or if you just need a refresher, feel free to check that out. That's on our YouTube channel, and we'll put the link in the description below. This video, though, is going to be a little bit more intermediate, where we're talking about some things to consider as you build your stable. We'll have a follow-up video to this where we get into the exact strategies that I've personally used when building my stable and have some examples. So as far as stable building factors and things to consider, there are really 5 main areas to focus on when I'm building my stable. And these are in no particular order of importance, but the first would be the contest and the format that you're playing in. There's a different strategy for double ups versus winner take all versus the standard format. Field sizes would be the second factor to consider. That one's fairly self-explanatory, but smaller fields versus higher fields, what are the pros and the cons of targeting each of those kinds of races? Bad morning lines, or morning lines where you think the public is going to bet significantly different than the morning line indicates. Scratches, and how you can use scratches to give yourself an edge in some races. And lastly, your own handicapping. So first, we'll start with the contest and the format. So it's important to recognize that different strategies can be a lot better at different types of contest formats. So what I mean by that is I will personally use a much different strategy when I'm entering a stable in a double up contest versus a standard format contest versus a winner take all format. In a double up, the top 40% of your finishers will get double their money. So if in a $10 double up, the top 40% get $20 back. In that kind of a format, there is no advantage to finishing first or second versus finishing in the 40th percentile and just doubling up your money. So in those kind of contests, I don't want high risk horses. I don't want horses that are $500 or $250 that maybe could win if everything goes their way, but also carry a lot of risk and that could also run last and lose me points. I'm not shooting for the moon here. I'm shooting for a safe threshold that I think will allow me to finish in the money. These are kind of formats where I might lean on some horses that a lot of people refer to as bridesmaid horses, or horses that are a bit of a hanger, horses that might only have one win out of 15 starts, but they've hit the trifecta 10 or 12 times. Those are good horses to use here, assuming that they're at the right price. Conversely, if I'm looking at a standard format, I will do some mixing and matching, and I will look for some higher risk horses that I think could give me an edge and provide some separation from my stable versus the masses. You want to kind of create that separation for yourself when you're looking at these formats where the payouts are weighted a lot more top heavy, especially in a winner take all format or a top 2 or top 5 format. I'll really take some shots because I don't want to have a really good contest score but happen to get beat out by someone who just freaked that day. So I'm looking to take more shots in those high risk, high reward formats and to play it a lot safer in double ups and triple ups. Another thing to consider though is the buy-in. So as a rule of thumb, the lower the buy-in, the higher the winning score. So if you're jumping in a $5 contest at Del Mar, for example, it's probably going to get 100 or 200 entries in it, which means the winning score is going to be very high. People can afford to play multiple entries, they're going to take some shots with some bombs, and there's just a lot more competition. On the other hand, if you're jumping in a $150 contest at Gulfstream, it's going to be a lot smaller. You're not going to have as many stables. There might be 25 stables or 30 stables or whatever, but it's going to be less than the cheap contests. And that means the scores on the whole are going to be lower. I mean, that's not to say that you can't have a couple unusual days where one stable pops off, but in general, higher the buy-in, lower the winning score, and then vice versa. For the lower the buy-in, the higher the winning score. So my general strategy is in low roller and free ride contests, you got to take your shots. You got to go in there with the idea that I'm probably going to need 400 plus points to win this contest. and build a strategy around getting to 400-ish points. At the higher dollar formats, I'm usually shooting for 350 points, and I'll go into that a little bit more later, but as a rule of thumb, just kind of know what score you'll need or what score you think you'll need to win a given contest, and then go in there and try to build a stable that you think can reach that number. Last thing I'll just touch on briefly is that there are some really good opportunities in the higher dollar contests. A lot of those have guarantees that don't often get met. So sometimes a contest that has a $7,500 guarantee might only take in $6,000 worth of stables. So a lot of times StableDuel will end up supplementing the pot, which creates a positive expectation event for the bettors and for the StableDuel players. So always look for those overlay contests, and I always throw in a stable whenever I see something like that likely to happen. Next, we'll talk about field sizes. So field sizes can play a really critical element when you're looking at which races to play in StableDuel as well as which horses to use. It's important to remember that the first 5 finishers get points in StableDuel regardless of the field size. So you can have a race at Kentucky Downs where there's 15 horses running and the top 5 get points, or you can have a race at Santa Anita where there's only 4 horses running and all 4 of those horses are guaranteed to get points. It doesn't scale based on field size. So that's something we can use to our advantage. Smaller fields will typically come with some higher priced horses because you have less horses to spread those odds amongst. However, you're generally going to have a much higher likelihood of getting positive points, if not an outright guarantee, depending on how small the field is. So that's something to consider is oftentimes, especially at the West Coast tracks, I'll see a stakes race perhaps with only 5 horses in it, and I'll take the cheapest horse. I'll take the horse at 15-1 for minimal investment that I'm not really sure he can win. In fact, I may think that the horse cannot win, but I'm banking on the fact that maybe one other horse in that race doesn't have their best day and they don't show up and he can get 4th. And for a minimal investment, I'm looking at 20 points minus beaten lengths. So that's often a good way to approach those small fields. You just got to be careful that you're not taking a horse that is really, really in over his head, because oftentimes they might finish 5th but get beat 25 lengths and you end up losing points anyway. On the other hand, large fields can offer some really good value opportunities because there is so many horses and options to spread the money out over. That kind of goes without saying, but if you're looking for a cheap play, you're probably not going to get it in a 5-horse field or a 6-horse field. You have a much better chance to spend that last $750 in a large field by trying to find a horse that you think can outrun his odds. Last thing to consider here is if you are going to double up in a race, that is something else I would look to do in some of the smaller fields. And when I say double up, I mean select multiple horses from the same race. So sometimes in a small field, another angle that I'll often like to use is to take the horse that I think is the most likely winner, even if it is a favorite, but to double up with the cheapest horse in the race as well. That way I can maximize my chance for points. I can take the horse that I think is going to win, but I can also hope to get a little bit lucky with the cheap horse on the back end and maybe he clunks up for 3rd or 4th. Next, we're going to talk about morning lines, specifically bad morning lines. I don't want to throw any shade at any lines maker. I know it's a tough job, but it is important as a handicapper to be able to recognize morning lines that are likely to be significantly different from the post-time odds. So a reminder, StableDuel sets the price of each horse based on morning line odds, and that does not change. It doesn't account for post-time odds or what the actual betting is. It's purely based off the morning line. That allows us as sharp handicappers to take advantage of horses that have morning lines that are going to be significantly different from their post-time odds. For example here, this was at Colonial Downs a little while ago. There was a horse in one of the races, the 9-horse Grateful Bred. We did a stream on it with On the Wrong Lead, and we all like this horse. We all recognize this horse is one of the most likely winners, if not the most likely winner in that field. But he was inexplicably made 12-1 on the morning line. So I think all of us played that contest that day. I think we all used Grateful Bred. He wins the race, and he pays $6. The horse goes off at 2-1 from a 12-1 morning line. That's honestly, a massive overlay. If you can get a horse that wins and goes off at 2-1, but you only paid 12-1 salary for him, that is huge. So you definitely want to take advantage of those kind of opportunities when you think that you found one. The last thing I'll comment on is don't let morning lines sway your opinions too much. Don't think that because the odds maker has this horse at 12-1 that if you like him, he shouldn't win. Be confident in your opinions and bet your opinions with confidence. If you really do think that horse is more like, a 5-1 or a 4-1, then go ahead and press that opinion. All right, next we're going to talk about scratches. So once again, scratches are an area where you can really take advantage of some massive overlays in StableDuel. So it's important to remember that StableDuel does not change the price of horses, regardless of scratches or changes. All of the StableDuel salary for horses are locked based on the morning line. So races where you get scratches can really offer good value in StableDuel. This isn't exactly a new take. It's not a secret really, so you're not going to get a huge edge over players who are already doing this. But if you're not doing this, then you are significantly behind the 8 ball versus a player who is. So the idea here is that a race that has 6 entries or 7 entries that has 2 or 3 scratches, those horses that are remaining are still priced as if there was a full field racing in that event. Even though with the scratches, there's only going to be 4 horses running instead of 7. That's huge. You're talking 40% of the field is no longer in, but you're still getting the horse at the same price as if those other 3 runners were still in the race. So those are races where it's really good to target as long as you can have some kind of opinion. You don't just want to guess, but if you can have any kind of opinion there, that's an excellent kind of race to target as a race that's been heavily impacted by scratches. Furthermore, if you can get lucky enough to find a race that has been impacted by scratches and a heavy morning line favorite scratches, that's another excellent opportunity to target that race in StableDuel. So there's a lot of times where you may have a favorite at 8-5, for example, who ends up scratching, where the second choice in that race was maybe 5-2 or 3-1 in the morning line. That horse is probably going to go off at 7-5, 3-2 with the result of the scratch, but you're still getting that horse at that initial price. That is a huge, huge overlay. That's like in daily fantasy sports, for DraftKings or whatever else. If you are planning to start Ezekiel Elliott and he ends up getting injured before the game, and you can get Tony Pollard for the same price as if Ezekiel Elliott was still going to play. Like that's the DFS equivalent of what this is, and it's a huge, huge edge to be able to get those horses at much better values. Lastly, if you can find an event that does happen sometimes where there are multiple scratches, including the favorite, that's an excellent race where I'll usually try to double up because I'm probably only spending a couple $1,000s and I have a very legitimate chance at taking down the winner and maybe a 3rd or 4th place finishing place as well on a fairly small or moderate investment. Lastly, handicapping. This one's pretty simple, guys. At the end of the day, your own handicapping is the most important factor in building your stable. You got to put the horses in there that you like. Don't fall into the trap of feeling like you need to use every last dollar of your full $50,000 budget. I've done this before. I'm sure everyone's probably guilty of it. But if you have $3,000, let me rephrase. If you have $6,000 left in your budget and you have an 8-1 horse that you really like, that would cost you $3,000. Don't feel obligated to go find a 5-1 horse at $6,000 just because you don't want to have that extra money left over. Like if you like that 8-1 and you don't really like any other 5-1s in the race or on the card, then use your 8-1. It's okay to have some money left over. Obviously, there's a point where you're probably leaving too much on the table. I wouldn't really be throwing stables in where I have $10,000 of unspent money. That probably means you can get some better opinions somewhere. But in general, if you have a couple $1,000s or a couple $100, don't worry about it. Just play the horses you like and don't feel obligated to try to spend every last dollar and switch off of horses that you actually like more. And lastly, this one's more of a personal piece of advice. As far as handicapping goes, everyone has their own method, and I'm not here to talk about that so much. But something that works well for me is looking at the pace scenarios, and especially those extreme pace scenarios where you can find a race that's absolutely loaded with speed, and then a cheap closer who's not fast enough to win, but probably gets the right race flow to run third. We'll call those clunk up closers a lot of the times, where the race falls apart and they just sort of inherit a second, third, fourth place finish at a $500 StableDuel cost. Those are very useful horses in StableDuel. Or on the other hand, the cheap speed horse, the horse that probably can't hold off the classier horses, but should be on the lone lead and likely to be able to hold on for a minor award just given the pace setup. So those are both kind of horses that I think can provide a lot of value in StableDuel. All right, lastly, we're just going to give some general tips. So first piece of advice would be have a plan. Generally, I say you need about 350 points to get in the conversation for winning a contest. As I said earlier, that depends on the contest you're in. Make sure you know your format. Make sure you know if it's a double up, then this does not really apply. If it's a winner take all in a cheap contest, this number is probably going to be higher. But on the whole, I generally shoot for about 350 points to put myself in the conversation. Second piece of advice would be don't feel obligated to play every race. This is something that I'm a big believer in, but I know others sort of play otherwise, and that's fine. But for me, I do not feel obligated to play every race ever. I have no problem skipping a race where I don't have a strong opinion and doubling up in another race. You have to understand that doing that, you are giving up a little bit of upside, because if you double up, the most you can get is 100 points. Whereas if you use two horses in two separate races, you could theoretically get 120 points plus whatever the margin for victory is. So you are giving up a little bit of upside, but if I really feel like I have no opinion in a race, I'm not going to blindly stab in that race just because I don't want to double up, because you can lose points, as we all know. And for me, I'd rather take two confident opinions with less upside rather than a confident opinion and a really weak opinion where I'm likely to lose points. Next, I'd say test different lineup building strategies to find what works for you. There's a number of different schools of thought out there on ways to build your stable, on skip races or don't skip races, double up, target short fields, go for bombs, stars and scrubs kind of approach. And I'll go into some of the more detailed strategies in the next video. But for now, I'd recommend getting in the free rolls and the cheap contest and trying a few different strategies to find out what you like and what seems to be successful for you. Lastly, you'll see this table I have on the screen here. This is a very, very rough guide, so do not take this to heart by any stretch. But this is kind of what I use when I'm looking at building my stables. Generally, the way to interpret this is when I'm going to pay so much money for a horse, there's a general position where I want that horse to finish. So basically, if I'm paying $8,000 or more for a horse, which translates to 3-1 or more favored than 3-1, I'm probably looking for winners. I probably don't want a horse at 3-1 if I don't think he can win. Now, obviously, this is preferred finish, so if you run second, that's fine. Of course, you'll still take the points. But this is generally what I'm shooting at when shooting for when trying to build a stable to get to 350 points. My $8,000 or more horses, I want to be strong win candidates. When I get to the 6,000 to 7,999 range, I'm really looking for horses that can run the exacta. Obviously, winners are great, but $6,000 translates to a 5-1 horse, so I'm kind of fine with those horses not winning. If I can get a horse to run second, that's perfect. 4,000 to 6,000, same concept, except now I'm willing to accept a horse at third or better. And then 3,000 or higher, I really just want them to hit the superfecta. For me, any horse under $3,000, I just want to get me positive points. I don't care if they win or if they run fifth, really. For less than $3,000, you're talking 8-1 shots or longer, or rather horses longer than 8-1, so pretty much 10-1 and longer. And at that point, those are horses who I just want to get me positive points and I don't want to lose points on. If I can have a horse for $500 or $750 that can run fifth, beaten 5 lengths and gets me 5 positive points, I'm thrilled with that. I'm really happy with that, and that's all you need. Oftentimes, you can get horses that outrun their odds significantly and win, which is great. So this is just a rough table that I use to try to build my stable. Of course, it's not perfect. You're going to have $3,000 horses that actually win, and you're going to have $8,000 horses that run fourth or run fifth. So it's going to be a mix and match, but this is just a rough guide that I use when trying to put together my stable. With that being said, I want to thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments below. You can always find me on Twitter at CalebWVU, or you can check us out on Wrong Lead at wrong_lead on Twitter. Feel free to post any questions, ideas, suggestions, or any thoughts for the next video coming up. So with that being said, thanks for listening, guys.